There are seasons where stillness feels like a stranger. You wake up already behind, already needed, already late to something. Your heart doesn't get to breathe before the weight returns. The silence you long for has been replaced by the hum of obligations and the volume of survival. Not all noise is loud. Some of it is subtle, constant, invisible to those around you, but relentless to your soul. And in the middle of all this motion, something holy has been lost. Each day begins with movement, but without direction. You carry tasks like armor and conversations like shields, yet deep down there's a question you've stopped voicing. God, where are you in all of this? You haven't lost faith. You've lost frequency. His presence hasn't departed. Your perception has just been clouded. Because when noise becomes normal, the whisper of heaven begins to feel like absence. Sometimes distraction disguises itself as discipline. You tell yourself you're being productive, committed, available. But beneath the surface, your heart is starving. The scroll of content, the endless notifications, the multitasking, they give the illusion of momentum, but they silence the parts of you that were built to listen. There's a kind of tired that rest can't fix. The kind that comes from being emotionally crowded, spiritually stretched, and afraid to slow down in case it all catches up. It was never meant to be this loud. Not in your spirit. Not in your thoughts. Not in your prayer life. Elijah knew what it was to run until he collapsed. He was a prophet with fire in his history and miracles in his memory, but even he reached a point where he needed more than noise. He needed God's nearness. And when it finally came, it wasn't through thunder or spectacle. It came in stillness. A voice not made to compete, but to invite. A whisper so gentle that only someone desperate enough to stop would hear it. Stopping feels risky when your life is built on speed. But the whisper will not shout. The voice that formed galaxies still prefers the language of silence. Not because God is distant, but because sacred things are rarely loud. You've prayed for answers, but what if the answer is space? What if the breakthrough requires less input and more stillness? Beneath your discipline, there's a worn-out soul. Not weak, just weathered. Not broken, just buried. You've done everything they said, prayed harder, served more, gave faithfully. But faith isn't measured in noise, and obedience isn't proven by exhaustion. Sometimes the holiest thing you can do is stop pretending you're fine and sit in the silence you've avoided. Not as a punishment, as an invitation. God doesn't meet you in your perfection. He meets you in your pause. He speaks in moments that feel empty, but are actually full of mercy. If you've ever sat alone in your car after a long day, hands trembling, unsure whether you need to cry or scream, that space is not godless. It's sacred. That's the space where whispers live. Restoration rarely begins in the spotlight. It starts in the hidden places where your soul finally admits it can't keep carrying the weight of constant noise. The Holy Spirit doesn't push. He waits. He doesn't overwhelm. He invites. And when you choose to step out of the current of performance, something in you begins to reawaken. Not every silence is the enemy. Some silences are God's sanctuary. Spiritual fatigue doesn't always come from sin. Sometimes it's the result of sustained noise that crowds out God's presence. You may not even realize how much of your inner world is filled with background static, things you've agreed to carry, roles you've taken on, fears you haven't named. But God sees every layer, and He's not asking you to fix yourself. He's simply asking for space to be heard again. This isn't about guilt. It's about grace. It's about remembering that you were never made to be spiritually self-sufficient. The shepherd never expected his sheep to lead themselves. That's why he calls by name in tones that quiet the wind. The voice of Jesus doesn't match the pace of your panic. It speaks into it, slower, kinder, firmer than fear. It speaks peace to the storms no one else sees inside you. There's a moment when even the strongest believers have to confess that the volume of life has overtaken the clarity of God. You can know the word and still feel numb. You can love the Lord and still miss His voice. But none of that disqualifies you. It simply reveals the urgency of returning to simplicity. The world will always reward more effort, more exposure, more noise. But heaven works differently. Heaven works in silence, in trust, in surrender. Sometimes the whisper comes not to give direction, but to remind you you're not alone. You're still held. You're still known. You're still seen by the one who doesn't need noise to notice you. In fact, he does his best work in what feels like your most hidden seasons. Even now, as your heart reads these words, there's a slowing, a softening, a shift. Not because the circumstances changed, but because something eternal is pressing gently through the fog of distraction, reminding you of what's always been true. God isn't far. He's just waiting for the room to speak. And maybe that's what you've needed all along. Not answers, but awareness. Not a voice from the clouds, but a whisper from within. That whisper that says, I'm still here. I never left. I've just been waiting for the noise to settle. There are no shortcuts to stillness. But there is healing there. The kind of healing that isn't dramatic, but steady. The kind that reaches into corners of your soul you forgot existed. God doesn't rush this process. He walks it. Slowly, faithfully, tenderly, like a shepherd calling a weary lamb home through a storm of other voices. You don't need to produce anything right now. You just need to return. You don't need to say all the right things. You just need to be present. The whisper will do the rest. The Spirit knows how to translate sighs into intercession and fatigue into sacred ground. This moment, it's not too late. This silence, it's not empty. This ache, it's not punishment. It's the sound of heaven getting close. There is no storm so loud that it can silence the voice of the one who walks on waves. Peace is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of someone greater than the noise. That's what Calm Your Heart was created for. Not for the perfect moments, for the honest ones. For people like me who are tired of hiding, but scared to fall apart. For souls who need structure, but not pressure. For hearts that need permission to rest before they recover. It's not a fix, it's a companion. A place to breathe when the world keeps spinning. A space where grace isn't rushed and peace doesn't feel like a performance. If this prayer feels like your own, then this journey is for you too. A path not paved by pressure, but by presence. Click the link in the pinned comment and give yourself a place to start healing. Not once you're strong. Right now, exactly as you are. There's a pain hidden inside every pause. The kind that doesn't scream, it just lingers. The kind you feel when prayers seem to float unanswered into the ceiling. When doors don't open, answers don't come, and the timeline you silently trusted begins to collapse under the weight of delay. That's when faith doesn't feel like power. It feels like patience. It feels like standing still while everything inside you begs to run. Waiting is the hardest form of trust. It strips your illusions of control, reveals how addicted we are to outcomes, and forces your heart to live in the tension between God's promise and your present. You say you believe He's working, but you can't see it. You tell yourself to trust, but it feels like silence. You hope, but your hands are empty. And in that fragile, holy space, heaven is not absent. It's active. Just because nothing around you is moving doesn't mean nothing above you is. The stillness you interpret as delay may be the soil where deeper miracles are taking root. You think the story is stalled, but God is still writing. He doesn't rush what He loves. He doesn't build quickly what He intends to last. And while your eyes see nothing changing, heaven sees your endurance as worship. Abraham waited for a son long after his strength had expired. Joseph sat in prison with dreams still breathing in the dark. Hannah cried in temples while her womb remained silent. Every story of God doing something great began with a season of waiting that didn't make sense. Heaven's rhythm isn't random. It's redemptive. There's no glory in pretending you're not tired of the wait. God doesn't need your performance. He welcomes your honesty. You can admit the ache. You can weep and still believe. You can question and still be faithful. What matters is that you stay. You don't need strength to wait, just surrender. Just the willingness to keep waking up and saying, God, I don't see it, but I trust you're not done. Some miracles are born in motion. Others are formed in stillness. The latter shape you before they ever change your surroundings. And that's the beauty no one talks about, how God grows your roots before He grows your reach. The longer the wait, the deeper the foundation. He isn't just preparing the outcome, He's preparing you for it. Delay isn't denial. It's design. It's grace slowing the story long enough for your character to catch up with your calling. It's love holding back the curtain until you're ready to carry what comes after. If you knew what He was protecting you from, You thank him for every door that stayed closed. If you saw the size of what he's setting up, you'd realize why it couldn't be rushed. This is not punishment. It's positioning. You've prayed for acceleration, but he's more interested in alignment. What if the waiting isn't to stretch your patience, but to save your soul from outcomes that would have broken you too soon? What if the pause is the place where he is perfecting your peace? Even when heaven is quiet, it's never inactive. The Spirit intercedes with groans too deep for words. The Father works all things together for good, even the things that haven't made sense yet. And the Son stands as your advocate, reminding the heavens that your name is still written on his hands. While you sleep, he orchestrates. While you wonder, he aligns. While you ache, he protects. You are not forgotten in the wait. You are being carried through it. Sometimes God doesn't change your situation because he's using it to change your heart. Sometimes he delays your request because your healing is happening in places you haven't noticed yet. The breakthrough you're waiting for may not arrive with fanfare, but it will arrive. And when it does, it will make sense why it had to take this long. Faith that rests is stronger than faith that rushes. Because to wait without understanding is to love God more than clarity. You can't see the roots beneath the surface, but that doesn't mean they're not growing. The oak doesn't emerge in days. The strongest trees take time, and so does your soul. So does restoration. So does promise. This isn't about what's visible. It's about what's lasting. There is mercy in every minute you're tempted to call meaningless. There's strength forming in the very places you thought were empty. Nothing is being wasted. Even now, especially now, God is threading purpose through your pain. The Israelites wandered through wilderness for 40 years, but every step led them closer to the land. Every moment of waiting held the echo of a promise God never forgot. Not one delay in their story erased their identity as his chosen people, and not one in yours has either. The Father isn't impatient with your doubts. He doesn't need you to pretend. You're allowed to sit in the tension. You're allowed to whisper, "I'm tired of waiting." But even then, he won't step away. He stays. He waits with you. He's not rushing your journey. He's walking it beside you. And that's the difference between worldly delays and divine ones. One leaves you anxious, the other anchors you deeper. When God ordains the waiting, he fills it with presence, even if you don't feel it. Especially when you don't. You were never meant to carry this uncertainty alone. You were never asked to map out every outcome. The shepherd never required the sheep to understand the path, only to trust the voice that leads. Sometimes what you need most isn't resolution, it's permission to stop holding everything so tightly. Not everything needs your strength to survive. What feels like a standstill is often a sanctuary. Not because nothing is happening, but because something sacred is. This isn't just a season to survive. It's a season to be shaped. One day, you'll look back and realize that the version of you that came out of this waiting was softer, stronger, and more stable than the one who entered it. That the silence wasn't empty, it was holy. That the ache wasn't meaningless, it was divine preparation. Heaven moves slowly sometimes, but it always moves on time. So take another breath. Let go of the pressure to produce meaning out of the mystery. God already knows what he's doing. He isn't rushed by the same clocks that haunt you. His timing isn't cruel. It's calibrated for the glory he intends to reveal. And it will be worth every second. You don't need to explain how you feel right now. You just need to know that the waiting doesn't mean you're alone. You've never been. Heaven has never been silent. It's just been working while you wait. Somewhere along the way, you became the one who holds everything together. The one who explains what no one else can put into words. The one who calms storms while hiding your own. The one who silently rewrites your emotions to sound more okay than they feel. Not because you're pretending, but because you thought that's what strength was. Being the answer. Being the glue. Being the one who absorbs what breaks around you. But somewhere in that survival, you forgot you were never meant to be the solution. Fixing things was never your calling, it was your coping. And somewhere deep inside, you started to believe that if you stop fixing, everything will fall apart. That if you let go, someone will get hurt. That if you step back, everything you've worked to keep standing might finally collapse. But the weight you're carrying was never assigned to you. It was just left in your hands. There's a difference between compassion and control. between loving someone and feeling responsible for their outcome, between caring deeply and believing you're the one who must hold the world together. You were called to love, but not to carry what only God can restore. The pressure to fix comes from a place that fears surrender. And surrender isn't passive. It's the courage to admit your limits, the wisdom to say, I can't, but He can. When Jesus called Peter out of the boat, He didn't ask him to calm the waves. He just asked him to walk. The fixing belonged to Christ. The faith belonged to Peter. You've been wading through waters that were never yours to navigate alone. You've exhausted yourself trying to bring peace to places that require a miracle, not a strategy. You've prayed, planned, intervened, and still, things remain broken. Not because you failed, but because you were never supposed to fix it in the first place. God doesn't call you to be the answer. He calls you to trust the one who already is. Even Moses tried to fix things on his own. Before he was ready, before the call, he killed an Egyptian in defense of justice. But justice without God's timing isn't restoration, it's reaction. And that reaction cost him 40 years in the wilderness. Not as punishment, but as preparation. Because Moses had to learn what we all do. That zeal can't replace surrender. That calling doesn't mean control. So much of what we try to fix in others is really an attempt to fix something within ourselves. We can't handle their pain because it reminds us of our own. We step in not only out of love, but sometimes out of fear. Fear that if they fall apart, we will too. Fear that if we don't solve it, we'll somehow be to blame. But love rooted in fear will always carry more than it should. Jesus never panicked in the presence of brokenness. He didn't rush into crisis with anxiety. He walked with peace because he trusted the Father. He cried, yes. He hurt deeply, but he never carried what wasn't his to heal. He knew when to speak and when to be silent, when to stretch out his hands and when to let someone walk away. You're allowed to rest even if others are still wrestling. You're allowed to breathe even if the people you love are still breaking. Your presence is not what holds them together, God's is. There's freedom in knowing that your role isn't to fix, but to be faithful. And faithfulness looks different than control. It looks like letting people experience consequences without shame. It looks like not interrupting a process that may be necessary for God's work. It looks like praying in secret rather than pushing in public. It looks like showing up without needing to solve everything. What you carry emotionally was never meant to live on your shoulders. It's been pressing down on you, stealing your sleep, dulling your joy, making you feel like a failure when outcomes fall apart. But those outcomes are not yours to own. Surrender doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop trying to be God. Some hearts aren't healed through your efforts, but through God's presence. Some stories need silence more than speech. Some healing doesn't come through your hands, it comes through waiting. Maybe what your soul is craving isn't one more way to help. It's permission to stop fixing what you were never called to carry. This is where trust becomes real. Not in the moments where everything works, but in the ones where it doesn't. When you step back not because you gave up, but because you finally gave it to God. When you stop asking, what else can I do? And start whispering, Lord, you see what I can't. I trust you with what I love. Letting go feels like weakness when your identity is tied to being needed. But strength isn't always holding on. It's knowing when release is obedience. You are not less spiritual because you're stepping back. You are not less faithful because you're tired. You're human. And you're allowed to rest in the truth that He is able. This isn't detachment. It's trust. It's choosing to believe that God's timing is better than your fixing. That His power is more precise than your plans. That He sees what's behind the behavior. That He knows the hidden places, the long histories, the fragile layers no solution could ever touch. You can't fix hearts with strategy. You can't fix trauma with performance. You can't fix brokenness with logic. But you can love. You can stand beside. You can hold space. You can pray without needing to produce. You can release the outcome and rest in the reality that you are still loved even when you're not solving anything. The world won't fall apart because you stopped holding it. In fact, it might be the first time you see that God was holding you the entire time. That the hands you thought were keeping things together were actually shaking. That the mask of peace was actually a cry for help. And now, you can be honest. You can fall into the arms of the only one who never needed fixing. The only one whose timing is perfect, whose grace is enough, whose power never sleeps. The only one who doesn't need your help, he only asks for your trust. Let go. Not because you're quitting. Let go because healing begins where control ends. There's a part of the soul that only reveals itself at night. Not when the room is silent, but when the world within you refuses to be. You lie in stillness, but your thoughts begin moving again. Not forward, just in circles. Questions you've avoided resurface, softly at first, then heavier with every hour. You replay conversations. You worry about outcomes. You brace yourself for what tomorrow might hold, even though you've barely made it through today. Your body is exhausted, but rest won't come, not because the bed is uncomfortable, but because peace feels far. The weariness isn't new. You've been walking through days with eyes that still carry the weight of yesterday's prayers. You don't say much about it anymore, not because you've stopped believing, but because it's harder to describe what faith looks like when it's quiet. When it doesn't feel like victory. When it's not shouting in confidence, but whispering through fatigue. Faith during the day can wear a smile. Faith at night is stripped down to its barest form. It's honest. It's trembling. It's still trying. And yet, even in that silence, faith does not disappear. Just because you stopped speaking doesn't mean faith stopped breathing. It doesn't fade when you're tired. It doesn't vanish when you sleep. It stays. It stands guard. It carries you when you let go. Not because of your strength, but because of the one who gave it. Faith is not dependent on your awareness of it. It holds when you can't. It moves when you're still. It protects when you close your eyes and surrender to the hours you cannot control. You believe the lie that you need to stay alert to stay faithful. That if you don't hold it all together, everything will unravel. That if you don't pray through every detail tonight, you're letting God down. But the truth is, He is not limited by your energy. He doesn't step back when you lie down. He leans closer. While you drift into sleep, His presence surrounds what you've entrusted to Him. And even when you forget what you asked for, He remembers. Jesus once slept through a storm. Not before it hit, but right in the middle of it. The winds howled. The boat shook. The disciples panicked. And yet He rested. Not because He didn't care, but because He knew who held the sea. That kind of rest doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from trust. Trust that knows the storm doesn't get the final word. Trust that believes peace is stronger than panic. Trust that understands presence is greater than control. You are not Jesus, but you are in Him, which means that kind of rest, deep, holy, fearless, is also available to you. Not after the chaos calms, but right in the middle of it. Right in the hour when everything feels fragile. Right in the moment when your thoughts say, "What if it falls apart?" And your soul replies, "Then God will still be there." Night doesn't cancel His promise. Darkness doesn't delay His hand. Silence doesn't signal His absence. You can stop rehearsing the worst. You can stop trying to solve tomorrow tonight. You are not the author of your outcome. You are the beloved of the one who already wrote the ending. There's something sacred about learning to rest while the world keeps spinning. About letting your mind lay down even before the answer comes. About saying, "I don't know how this works out, but I trust that it does." Because faith isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quietest part of you, part that refuses to give up, even in the absence of answers. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop controlling. It means you stop believing that vigilance is the same as surrender. It means you finally let go of the fear that tells you you're alone in the dark. You're not. You are seen. You are surrounded. You are safe. The one who knit your soul knows what it needs. And right now, it needs rest more than it needs resolution. It needs softness more than answers. It needs to be reminded that there is no weakness in sleeping while heaven keeps watch. You weren't created to bear the night alone. There is beauty in the quiet faith of someone who chooses to rest anyway, not because they've figured it all out, but because they trust the one who has. That kind of surrender is not passive, it's powerful. It's not retreat, it's return. Return to the shepherd who guards his sheep even when they're asleep. Return to the arms that held you long before you ever felt the need to hold yourself. The world will never tell you this. It will tell you to push through. to keep thinking, keep planning, keep worrying just in case it helps. But worry has never rescued a soul. Worry has never protected a heart. Worry doesn't hold the future. It only poisons the present. Faith, on the other hand, anchors. Even when your grip loosens, even when your head spins, even when you've prayed all you know how to pray and still feel like nothing's changed, faith stands still. Not because of your ability, but because of his character. He does not need your wakefulness to work. Candle anchor. Maybe what your soul needs tonight isn't more striving, but to remember that what's unfinished in your hands is already being completed in his. You don't have to see it happening to believe it's true. He heals while you sleep. He restores while you rest. He speaks peace into places your thoughts haven't even reached yet. He ministers to wounds you forgot were still bleeding. He fills cracks you didn't notice forming. He does more in your stillness than you've ever done in your striving. So give yourself permission. Not because you're giving up, but because he's already stepped in. Give yourself room to breathe. Give yourself grace for not being unshakable. He never asked you to be. He asked you to come, even now, even like this, especially like this. Rest isn't a sign of defeat. It's evidence of trust. And the more you trust, the deeper you sleep. The deeper you sleep, the clearer the morning becomes. Not because the problems disappear, but because your spirit wakes up remembering who was faithful through the night. You've made it through long nights before. You've survived with less clarity than you have now. You've been kept, even when you didn't know you were being carried. So tonight, don't fight the stillness. Let it speak. Let it remind you that the weight you've carried wasn't yours to begin with. Let it draw you back to the shepherd's voice, not in thunder, not in fire, but in that low, slow whisper that says, "I've got you." You can let go now. You're not late. You're not behind. You're not forgotten. You're not too fragile to be restored. You're simply tired, and that is not a sin. That is a sign that you've given much, that you've stayed through storms, that you've waited without answers. And now it's time to let faith hold you while you sleep. There is a silent pressure that creeps into the soul unnoticed. It settles into your thoughts like fog, soft, subtle, but dense enough to cloud the light. You wake with it behind your eyes, carry it between conversations, and sleep with it humming behind your ribs. It doesn't always have a name, but it has weight. You start to believe that if you don't stay ahead, things will fall apart. That if you loosen your grip, everything you love will slip through your fingers. And so you hold tighter, not out of control, but out of fear. Fear that no one else is watching. Fear that if you let go, no one else will step in. Fear that trust might be too costly if it leads to disappointment. You're not alone in that. The most faithful often carry the heaviest sense of responsibility, not because they don't believe in God, but because they think it's their job to protect what He's entrusted. But somewhere, belief turns into burden, and faith begins to blur with performance. You start measuring your peace by how well you can predict outcomes, and you pray not with open hands, but with clenched fists, hoping He will agree with your plan. Control never begins as rebellion. It starts as survival. You didn't mean to take His place. You just didn't know how to let go without feeling irresponsible. The world teaches that peace comes from certainty, but heaven never made that promise. The peace of God is not the absence of unknowns. It's the presence of someone greater than the answers. Still, your heart aches to manage what cannot be managed, and the tension grows louder when prayers go unanswered. God never asked you to carry the future. He asked you to trust Him with it. That doesn't mean being passive. It doesn't mean turning away from wisdom. But it does mean releasing the illusion that your understanding is the foundation of peace. The hands that formed galaxies don't need your micromanagement. They need your trust. And trust, real trust, doesn't require full visibility. It only needs full surrender. You want to know what's coming. You want guarantees. But the kingdom doesn't run on certainty. It runs on presence. Jesus never told the disciples where every step would lead. He said, "Follow me." And they did, not because they had the map, but because they knew the voice. That same voice calls you to breathe differently. To live from a place where your peace isn't based on prediction, but on proximity to Him. Trying to control everything is like holding water in your hands. Tighten your grip, and it escapes faster. You are weary not because you're weak, but because you're doing too much with what was never yours. You weren't designed to carry what only God can sustain, and no amount of planning can secure what only His grace can protect. You can work with Him, but you cannot work for Him when it comes to outcomes. That's not your assignment. What happens when your best effort still isn't enough? What happens when you pray, prepare, pursue peace, and still wake up afraid? That's where trust begins to do what worry never could. It steadies your breath in the absence of answers. It softens your soul without silencing its ache. It meets you not with explanations, but with presence. God doesn't always show you the solution. Sometimes He simply shows you Himself, and somehow that's enough. You've been managing your life like a system that might crash at any moment. But you're not an operator. You're a child. The Father does not place the survival of the house on the shoulders of the one who sleeps under its roof. He takes that role, and He never relinquishes it. Surrender is not stepping away. It's stepping back into the proper position. Not as the guardian of everything, but as the beloved of the one who guards it all. True surrender doesn't come from apathy. It rises from reverence. When you realize that your control never guaranteed anything, but His care never failed, you begin to loosen the grip. You begin to say, even if I don't know how this ends, I trust who holds it. That confession isn't weakness. It's freedom. The moment you stop trying to manage God is the moment you begin to rest in Him. Not passively, not lazily, but humbly, peacefully, relationally. He longs to lift what you've convinced yourself you must carry alone. The heart wasn't built to survive on pressure. It was made to breathe under mercy. You've exhausted yourself trying to do what grace was designed to do. You've rewritten outcomes in your mind 100 times, hoping one will hurt less. You've confused caution with discernment, but the truth is, fear has taken the lead. Let Him interrupt that. Let Him remind you that the safest place isn't inside the plan. It's inside His hands. You may still feel the weight, but you don't have to carry it alone. And if it all unravels, He remains. He's still the same when prayers are answered and when they're not. Still steady when life is unpredictable. Still kind when expectations shatter. Still faithful when faith is tired. You won't find your peace at the end of your plan. You'll find it the moment you realize it was never yours to orchestrate in the first place. So let the tension fall from your shoulders. Let the questions remain unanswered tonight. Let the what-ifs pass through without needing to be solved. The one who calms seas does not require your forecast to steady your soul. He is already where you're going. He's already guarding what you love. He's already written what you're still worrying about. Let go. Not because everything is resolved, but because everything is known. Not because the night got lighter, but because His arms are strong enough to hold it in the dark. There are hours in the night that feel longer than the days that came before them. Not because of what's happening around you, but because of what's happening inside. You sit in the quiet, and somehow the stillness makes the shadows louder. Thoughts stretch wider. Fears feel heavier. Everything you pushed aside when the world was moving finds its way back to your doorstep when it goes still. And you wonder, who sees me now? Who hears me here? You've been the one holding steady for everyone else. You've said all the right things, given all the right advice, stood tall when others fell. But now here in the hours that no one talks about, you feel what you rarely admit, that even strong people get scared in the dark. Even those who know the word by heart sometimes lie awake asking, God, are you watching this? And He is. He always was. Not because you earned His attention, not because you prayed the right words, not because you've done enough to deserve His nearness. Simply because it's who He is. A father who doesn't sleep. A shepherd who doesn't wander. A guardian who never blinks. You've been taught that faith means action. That spiritual maturity means movement. But some of the deepest trust is revealed in stillness. Not the kind where nothing matters, but the kind where everything does, and you choose to release it anyway. Not because you stopped caring, but because you know His care exceeds your own. Not because you're passive, but because you know His presence is more powerful than your plans. There's something sacred in knowing that while the world is quiet and your spirit is restless, God is awake, fully present, fully attentive, fully engaged in details you don't even have language for yet. He doesn't nod off between emergencies. He doesn't prioritize louder cries over yours. He doesn't get distracted by chaos elsewhere. You have his full attention, even now. The psalmist didn't say the Lord guards while you pray. He said he guards while you sleep. He keeps watch not because you're worthy, but because you're his. The watchtower of heaven isn't empty in the dark. The eyes that form the galaxies still see you when your eyes finally close. And even the breathless moments when words escape and worry rises are not lost on him. The weight you feel in your chest isn't invisible to him. The thoughts that repeat like a loop, trying to find where peace slipped away, he hears them before you speak. The fears you won't say out loud because you think they sound like doubt, he understands those too. He is not looking for flawless strength. He is listening for honest surrender. You've been trying to stay alert, as if your awareness guarantees safety. But your vigilance was never the shield. It was never your eyes that guarded the story. It was never your instincts that protected the people you love. You believe that stepping back means losing control, but you were never the one keeping it all in place to begin with. The one who watches doesn't miss a single sigh. He doesn't overlook a whispered prayer, even when it sounds more like a plea than a declaration. He doesn't require volume to recognize faith. And he never needed your consistency to remain committed to you. You may forget the promises. You may falter in your hope. You may stop looking forward because waiting has worn you down. But he does not waver. His gaze remains locked, not on your performance, but on your heart. The part of you that still reaches, even when the words run dry. The part that keeps showing up, even when you're unsure what else to offer. That's the part he calls beautiful. Even in the night, his work doesn't pause. He aligns what you cannot see. He restores what you didn't know was breaking. He whispers peace into places where fear once dictated your pace. The Spirit intercedes without your prompting. The Father surrounds without waiting for a signal. Heaven is not activated by your urgency. It is driven by love that never shuts down. You've been carrying the assumption that if you stop watching, something will be missed. That if you sleep, something might slip away. But what kind of faith is built on fear of rest? What kind of peace is only sustained by pressure? It's not weakness to rest and trust. It's wisdom. Not everything depends on your ability to foresee what's next. Some things only unfold when you release them. Not because you're giving up, but because you're finally giving them back to the one who never lost sight of them. Let that reality change how you breathe. Let it reframe the way you see your limitations. Not as failures, but as reminders that you were never meant to carry this alone. There is a reason why you need sleep, and why he doesn't. There is a reason why you run out, and he doesn't. You were made to trust him in your stopping, not just in your striving. There are things only he can handle. Not because you didn't try hard enough, but because they were never supposed to be resolved by your strength. There is mercy in that realization. A gentleness that replaces shame with surrender, and a strange kind of peace that finds you the moment you finally exhale and say, God, if you're watching, I don't have to be. Sometimes what you're missing isn't more insight. It's the quiet reassurance that someone is already guarding what you've been trying to protect on your own. That truth doesn't silence every storm, but it silences the lie that you're alone in it. It doesn't fix every fear, but it disarms their authority. Even now, while you sit quietly or lie awake or wipe tears in the dark, you're not abandoned. Your name is still engraved. Your future is still seen. Your needs are still known. The door of heaven is not closed in the night. He watches when you sleep. He guards when you stop. He keeps when you forget. He moves when you wait. He loves when you doubt. So stop rehearsing the pain as if your memory is what protects you. Stop preparing for what he's already gone ahead to meet. Stop exhausting yourself trying to outplan the unknown. Let the truth settle into the places that never feel settled. You are not uncovered. You are not vulnerable. You are not forgotten. The one who watches never blinks. Not in war. Not in heartbreak. Not in silence. Not in fear. He's still here. Still present. Still sovereign. Still watching. There are things you carry that no one else can see. Not because you hide them, because they don't fit into words. You've learned how to smile without brightness, how to move without momentum, how to function while feeling like something inside you is slowly folding inward. People admire your strength, but they don't see the weight that made it necessary. And you've grown used to that, to being the one who can't afford to fall apart because others are leaning on you. Still, there's a moment when your soul stops pretending. When your own silence begins to ache. When your hands, once so capable, start trembling, not out of weakness, but from the pressure of holding too much for too long. It doesn't show up as collapse, at least not at first. It shows up as numbness. Fatigue that sleep can't fix. Sadness that doesn't have a clear name. The slow erosion of hope beneath the surface of all the things you never say aloud. And even then, God is near. Not to reprimand you for being tired. Not to demand more faith from someone already worn thin. But to gently, quietly reach beneath the weight you're carrying and remind you, it was never meant to be yours alone. That what feels impossible to you has never once strained his strength. That the weight breaking your back hasn't even made him blink. You were never asked to hold it all. From the beginning, the invitation wasn't to carry, but to come. Not to fix, but to follow. Not to manage every outcome, but to trust that nothing escapes the hands of the one who formed your frame and knows its limit. That's not failure. That's design. You were created with limits not to shame you, but to lead you to surrender. You weren't made to absorb every need, predict every turn, or support every soul in your life. You were made to depend, to lean, to cast, not collect. And still, there is a quiet pride we call responsibility that keeps us clinging to burdens not assigned to us. You pray but still keep planning backup routes in your mind. You ask for help, yet keep negotiating with fear just in case heaven takes too long. You call it stewardship, but your soul knows it's survival. Even the strongest arms break when they carry what wasn't meant for them. God's strength isn't given to reinforce your grip. It's offered so you can let go. Not out of recklessness, not from apathy, but from faith. The kind that says, this isn't mine anymore. I was never meant to carry what only a Savior can redeem. There are some heartbreaks that no human comfort can heal. Some outcomes that no amount of foresight can control. Some seasons that no amount of planning can shorten. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you real. Moses learned that on the mountain. Elijah learned it beneath the tree. Even Paul, bold and unshakable, wrote of being crushed beyond his ability to endure. And still, each of them met God not in their strength, but in their limit. The breaking point is not the end of faith. It is often the beginning of deeper intimacy. You've prayed, help me carry this. But maybe the more honest prayer is, please carry me. There is nothing shameful in admitting that it's too much. It doesn't make your faith smaller. It doesn't cancel your hope. It simply reveals the truth, that you were made to collapse into his strength, not carry your life with silent panic while quoting verses you no longer feel. His hands do not shake when you fall apart. His hold doesn't loosen when you begin to question. His care isn't contingent on your clarity. He's not asking you to explain your exhaustion. He's asking you to give it a name and hand it over. Not so you'll be instantly restored, but so you'll finally stop living like your survival depends on your control. Sometimes what you need most isn't a miracle to lift the burden, but the permission to stop pretending you're the one who's meant to carry it. There is healing in release. Not because everything changes right away, but because the weight begins to shift. Because the pressure begins to ease. Because your soul starts remembering what it means to rest in something stronger than your own willpower. You don't have to carry every fear about the future. You don't have to manage every crisis unfolding around you. You don't have to stay strong in moments when your strength is gone. God doesn't gain glory from your exhaustion. He meets you in it. He sits in the silence when words no longer suffice. He covers the cracks you didn't realize had deepened. He binds up the places where your faith and fatigue coexist and calls even your weariness holy. There is no shame in needing to be held. You were created to be carried. And maybe tonight is not about endurance. Maybe it's not about progress. Maybe it's not even about understanding. Maybe it's simply about loosening your grip and letting grace do what effort never could. You're not too much for him. You're not a burden. You're not behind. You're not weak for weeping or broken for needing help. You're just human. And humanity is the very thing Christ chose to enter so he could meet you here, not after the healing, but inside the ache. So if everything feels heavy again, don't reach for more willpower. Don't pretend peace is already present when it isn't. Just breathe, and in that breath, remember the truth your spirit already knows. He never asked you to carry what only his hands can hold. There's a kind of quiet that feels too fragile to trust. A moment of stillness, maybe even relief, and then suspicion. You wait for it to vanish, because it always does. You're not used to peace staying. When it visits, it feels more like a guest than a promise. And the truth is, somewhere along the way, you started treating peace like an emotion instead of a presence. A fleeting relief rather than a rooted reality. What no one told you is that peace doesn't always arrive wrapped in calm. Sometimes it shows up in chaos and stands like a pillar, immovable, even while everything around it shakes. Not because you feel secure, but because something deeper than feeling is holding ground inside you. That something isn't logic. It's not understanding. It's not even comfort. It's the kind of truth that sinks deeper than fear can reach. Peace has never required the absence of noise. It only requires the presence of trust. Emotions are rivers. They rise and fall. They can drown, but they can also pass. Peace, though, it's different. It's the ground you stand on when everything else becomes water. It's the voice that remains when anxiety has said its piece. And it's not self-created. You don't summon peace like a skill. You receive it like rain on dry earth. Jesus didn't say, "Feel peace." He said, "My peace I leave with you." Not a concept. Gift. A covering. A foundation. But most days, you don't feel it like that. You walk through long hours that drain your strength and test your belief. You hold your breath between texts. You reread headlines. You wonder how stillness could even exist in a world so violent, so unstable. You try not to panic when the unexpected arrives, but panic doesn't ask for permission. And somewhere in the middle of it all, you wonder why your soul doesn't feel calm. But peace was never promised to feel like calm. What was offered was presence. Steady, unshakable, unflinching presence. Not the removal of the storm, but the confidence that the storm can't move the ground beneath your feet. Not immunity from suffering, but intimacy in the middle of it. Foundations aren't visible. They aren't loud, but they carry the weight of everything built on top of them. You don't always feel them, but you live because of them. That's how peace works. It isn't a blanket. It's a base. It doesn't promise to warm you. It promises to hold you. And when your world begins to tilt, it doesn't offer explanation, it offers grounding. Sometimes the anxiety still comes. The questions still knock. The tears still rise. But instead of falling apart, something holds. You shake, but you don't collapse. Not because you're strong, but because what's beneath you is stronger than what's against you. Not everyone will see it. You might still cry in your car. You might still tremble in the hallway. You might still have sleepless nights. But the difference is there's something underneath all of it now. Something not shaped by your circumstances. Something not shaken by your doubts. Something that doesn't shift with your emotional weather. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "In this world, you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world." He wasn't giving you a disclaimer. He was giving you a foundation. He was telling you what peace really means. Not ease, not escape. A steady floor when nothing else holds. Maybe the calm you've been searching for isn't missing. It's just been buried under too many voices that were never meant to define safety. You've tried to earn peace by eliminating risk. You've tried to chase it through planning, control, even performance. But peace doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from knowing you don't need them in order to be okay. The most grounded people aren't those with the fewest problems. They're the ones whose roots reach deeper than their pain. They've learned how to stand still without shutting down. They know how to stay open while being surrounded by unknowns. That's not personality. That's presence. It's what happens when your security is no longer connected to stability. It's what takes shape when the loudest voice in your life is no longer fear. That kind of peace doesn't shout. It speaks through consistency. It holds you when nothing else makes sense. And it teaches your heart how to stop begging for feelings and start standing on truth. Eventually, you realize something profound. You don't have to feel peaceful to be at peace. Just like you don't have to feel brave to walk forward. Or feel healed to be in the process of healing. Peace isn't a mood, it's a presence. And that presence isn't based on your performance. You could have a messy past, a trembling heart, an overthinking mind, and still be standing on solid ground. The enemy will tell you that peace is only for those who've mastered their emotions, but Scripture tells you it's a gift for those who trust the giver. Trust doesn't mean pretending. It means staying when you feel like fleeing. It means breathing even when your chest is tight. It means whispering truth louder than what fear is shouting. Some nights you won't feel it. Some days you'll forget it. Some moments you'll question if it was ever real. That's okay. The foundation isn't shaken just because your feet stumble. You're not held together by your understanding. You're held together by grace. And grace doesn't weaken when you waver. It doesn't move when you panic. It doesn't leave when you forget what it promised. So when the room is spinning, when your thoughts get tangled, when your heart rushes ahead of your breath, slow down. Not to find the perfect phrase, not to force a breakthrough, but to remember the ground hasn't shifted, even if everything else has. That is peace, and it's not going anywhere. There's a story you've been telling yourself in silence, not out loud, not even in prayer, just beneath the surface of everything. A quiet narrative, looping in your thoughts, scripting the ending before the page turns. It starts small, an assumption, a fear, a memory, but over time it becomes familiar, comfortable in its ache, predictable in its sorrow. You already know how the conversation will go, how the situation will unfold, how the people will respond. And so you live not just in the present, but in the shadow of endings that haven't even happened. This kind of rehearsal isn't conscious. It's survival. You try to prepare for disappointment by living it early. You imagine every version of rejection so that if it comes, it won't sting as much. You build mental outcomes to protect your heart from the shock of being blindsided again. But all it really does is wear you down from the inside out. Because anxiety doesn't just borrow from the future, it steals from your ability to breathe in the now. There's no peace in trying to predict what only God can see. Still, you can't help it some days. The what-ifs arrive uninvited. You replay the moment you regret, the words you didn't say, the silence you didn't expect. You tell yourself you're just trying to understand, but your heart knows better. You're trying to control the ending by rehearsing it in advance. And every time you do, you forfeit the gift of trusting what's not yours to write. God didn't give you a pen for the future. He gave you grace for the present. And grace doesn't operate in fear. It doesn't write scripts based on past trauma. It doesn't draw conclusions from silence or assume absence when things feel still. It invites you to stand in the middle of the page and stop reaching ahead. To stop narrating disasters that haven't come and assigning motives that don't exist. The hardest part of surrender isn't letting go of the past. It's releasing the ending you think is coming. Control gives you the illusion of safety. It tells you that if you think it through enough times, it'll hurt less. That if you emotionally detach now, the loss won't wreck you later. But all it really does is rob you twice. Once when you worry, and again if the fear ever becomes real. And most of the time, it never does. That's the cruelty of false endings. They exhaust you with pain that may never even arrive. Scripture is filled with people who didn't know the ending. Joseph sat in prison with no idea if vindication would come. Ruth followed Naomi with no guarantee of redemption. David fled for his life not knowing if he'd ever sit on the throne. None of them rehearsed a perfect outcome. They just kept showing up. They didn't trust the plot, they trusted the author. What would shift in you if you stopped trying to resolve the ending and started resting in the presence of the one writing it? The ache in your chest is not just from what happened. It's from the weight of imagining how it might happen again. And somewhere in that cycle, the enemy slips in not with destruction, but with suggestion. You've seen this before. You know how this goes. Why expect different? But heaven does not repeat fear's patterns. The cross didn't lead to a sealed tomb. It led to an open one. What if this isn't the ending you've braced for? You've conditioned your faith to anticipate pain before promise. But maybe that's not trust. Maybe that's trauma masquerading as preparation. True faith doesn't require you to feel brave. It invites you to be honest. And honesty sounds like, I'm scared this will hurt again, but I'm still here. That is not weakness. That is sacred courage. Healing starts when you stop feeding fear the script. not because you ignore it, but because you tell it. You don't get to finish this story. Letting go of the ending doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop rehearsing every possible collapse. It means you stop mentally packing for heartbreak that hasn't arrived. It means you trust that even if things break, you'll be held through the falling. You're allowed to hope without needing certainty. You're allowed to pray without needing proof. You're allowed to stay open without knowing how you'll heal if it goes wrong. That's the kind of faith that moves mountains, not because it knows the outcome, but because it knows the one who never changes no matter how the outcome unfolds. Peace doesn't require a finished sentence. It only needs you to stop interrupting with fear before grace has spoken. You've written so many versions of the future in your head. Some are beautiful. Most are bleak. And all of them are heavy. But the moment you release the need to predict the ending, your soul begins to breathe again. The weight lifts, not because the circumstance changed, but because the outcome stopped being your job. That's what rest feels like. Not an absence of concern, but an absence of control. God knows how to conclude what He begins. And He never asked you to hold the last page. He only asked you to trust the hand that holds it. Even if the ending looks different than you imagined, it won't be outside of His goodness. Even if pain still comes, it won't be wasted. Even if things fall apart, it won't be the end. Even if silence lingers, it won't mean absence. Even if you don't feel strong, it won't change your worth. Let the pages unfold without fear dictating the pace. Let grace fill the gaps you keep trying to narrate on your own. Let go of the version of the future where everything hurts, and let something softer surprise you. There is joy ahead that doesn't need you to earn it. There are breakthroughs coming that don't depend on your performance. There is restoration moving toward you that doesn't look like repetition. And maybe, just maybe, the ending you're afraid of never even belonged in your story. There's a kind of praise that doesn't wait for daylight. It doesn't rise from relief or celebration, and it isn't dressed in clarity. It grows quietly in places where answers haven't come, where the silence hasn't broken, and where the night has stretched longer than anyone expected. Most people associate worship with joy, with dancing, with hands lifted in visible triumph. But there's another kind of worship, the kind that begins before the miracle, the kind that finds its voice in the absence of resolution, the kind that doesn't sound like victory, but still reaches heaven with power. It's the kind that says, even here, even now. Not all praise is loud. Some praise begins as a whisper in the dark. Not because you lack faith, but because the moment calls for honesty more than noise. There are nights when singing feels impossible, not because you've forgotten the truth, but because pain has blurred the edges of your strength. Still, something inside you refuses to be silent. Not because of how you feel, but because of who He is. And that's what makes praise in the night different from praise in the morning. It comes from conviction, not convenience. Mornings are easy places for worship. New mercies are visible. The warmth of light feels like confirmation. You survived the shadows, and now you feel justified in rejoicing. But what about the hour before the dawn? What about the silence that stretches too long? What about the moments when answers don't come quickly, when prayers still echo without reply? That's when praise becomes an anchor, not an escape, not denial. A choice to declare that God's worth hasn't changed, even when your world has. It's tempting to believe that waiting seasons are wasted spaces. That worship should wait until the breakthrough arrives. But Scripture is filled with voices that sang before chains broke, that lifted thanks before deliverance came, that bowed low before rescue was guaranteed. Paul and Silas didn't praise God because the prison doors were open. They praised in the dark, with wounds still fresh, with no promise of release in sight. And heaven responded not to their need, but to their faith. You don't have to feel strong to be surrendered. You don't need poetic words to offer a holy sound. Praise that shakes heaven isn't always beautiful. It's real. It's the sound of someone choosing God when nothing makes sense. It's the echo of trust that refuses to die in the dark. There is something sacred about praising God while your heart breaks, about lifting your voice while your hands are empty, about declaring His goodness when your life doesn't look like it. Not because you're pretending, but because you've decided not to let your pain define your theology. The night is real, but so is the God who holds it. Sometimes praise sounds like lament. Sometimes it sounds like breath between sobs. Sometimes it doesn't sound like anything at all. but it rises, carried in the spirit, too deep for language. And God receives it just the same, not for its perfection, but for its surrender. The enemy's goal is not only to wear you down, it's to silence you. Because worship isn't decoration, it's a weapon. It reminds you who still reigns, even when shadows say otherwise. It lifts your eyes from your circumstance to your source. It rewrites your focus. It reframes your fear. This kind of worship is slow. It's honest. It doesn't demand a certain feeling. It surrenders in spite of it. Praise in the dark doesn't guarantee that the morning will come faster. It doesn't manipulate God into acting. It simply holds onto what's already true, that He is worthy and He is near, even if your eyes can't see it yet. That's why midnight praise is some of the most powerful worship that exists. It's not born in comfort, it's born in desperation. Not rooted in victory, but in reverence. It carries weight, not because it's performed, but because it's real. And heaven never overlooks what it costs you to give it. Maybe what your spirit needs tonight isn't rescue from the night, but melody that teaches your soul to remain awake inside it. You've waited for light to return, thinking that praise belonged to the bright parts of the story. But praise was never tied to sunlight. It was always tied to presence. And presence has never left, even when the answers did. Let this be the moment where your worship shifts from being a reaction to being a foundation. Not because you saw something change, but because something unshakable inside you refused to forget who He is. Praise doesn't mean pretending. It doesn't mean suppressing grief or denying sorrow. It simply means acknowledging a deeper truth while the pain remains. It is the soul's defiance against despair. It is the way faith breathes when breath is short. So bring what you have, even if it's quiet, even if it's cracked, even if it's slow and uneven and trembling. It still counts. It still matters. It still reaches the throne. Praise isn't just for the morning. It was made for the night. There's a weight you've been carrying that doesn't have a name. It shows up in your body before it shows up in your thoughts. A tightness in your chest. A shortness of breath when nothing obvious is wrong. You try to trace its source, to explain it rationally, but your soul knows it's coming from somewhere deeper. There are battles you don't understand fully, moments of unrest you can't connect to anything concrete, and beneath it all, the nagging suspicion that something is happening beyond what your eyes can see. What you sense isn't imagined. It's spiritual. Not everything heavy has a visible cause. Not every war is declared in daylight. Some of the greatest tensions are fought in silence, where fear whispers through routine, where exhaustion doesn't match your physical day, where pressure seems disconnected from the actual weight in front of you. You've tried to rest. You've tried to reset, but something won't settle. And you wonder, without saying it aloud, maybe this time you're just losing ground. But that's not what's happening. Not all stillness means defeat. Not all silence signals absence. Sometimes the battlefield is unseen, not because it's empty, but because it's occupied by hands far greater than yours. There are wars being fought on your behalf that God hasn't asked you to fight, only to trust. You weren't called to lift every weapon, to engage every enemy, to understand every threat. Some of heaven's greatest victories unfold in places your prayers have never reached, in realms your mind cannot access. That's not weakness. That's divine mercy. God does not require your awareness to begin defending what's yours. When you sleep, the watcher does not slumber. When you worry, the advocate does not waver. While your thoughts are tangled, His strategy is already in motion. He doesn't need permission to intervene. He doesn't wait for your strength to begin working. You may feel like nothing is moving, but that's only because the work is happening behind a veil of mercy. Spiritual warfare is not always loud. It doesn't always feel like conflict. Often, it feels like fatigue, distraction, the inability to focus when you once had clarity, the subtle erosion of your confidence, not in doctrine, but in your place within it. You don't doubt God exists, you just start to wonder if He sees you in this moment. That shift is the front line. That question is where the war begins. And that's where He steps in, not with explanations, but with presence. Not with a list of instructions, but with quiet strength. He doesn't call you to perform when you're barely breathing. He surrounds. This is the fight you haven't seen, the one not measured in outcomes, but in persistence. The enemy's goal isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's distortion. If he can't break you, he'll bend the lens through which you see yourself, your calling, your God. And yet, that twisting loses power the moment you remember who defends you. Not your own willpower. Not your own consistency. Not your theology, sharp as it may be. The defender fights not because you've earned it, but because he loves. You don't need to sense it to stand in it. You don't need goosebumps or confirmation to be covered. This is what David meant when he wrote, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." He didn't say because the enemy vanished, but because God was there. Protection doesn't always feel like deliverance. Sometimes it's simply not falling apart when every part of you expected to. And maybe that's what you've missed. You thought survival meant stagnation. You assumed because nothing changed, nothing happened. But holding ground during invisible war is no small thing. You didn't quit. You didn't walk away. You're still here. And that alone is evidence that someone has been standing where you couldn't. When you stopped praying clearly, something holy continued interceding. When your worship became whispers, the Spirit carried the sound farther than you realized. When your courage waned, heaven did not. You weren't forgotten. You were protected. What you can't trace with your senses, you will one day see in your story. Not every battle ends with a trumpet. Some end with endurance. There's a reason your soul feels battered but not broken. Because you're not the only one holding the line. Because someone has been rebuking storms before they reached your door. Because mercy has shielded you from wars you never even knew were coming. Don't assume God is distant because the clouds remain. He's the kind of commander who marches inside them. He's the God of thunder and whisper alike. The one who parts seas and speaks in fire, and also hides you in the cleft of the rock when the winds rage. You've been taught that breakthrough comes with a moment. But sometimes it comes as a quiet continuation, as breath when you thought you were finished, as clarity on a random Tuesday morning, as peace not loud and triumphant, but slow and steady, something no storm has been able to undo. Those things are not accidents. They are the echoes of battles fought on your behalf, fires extinguished before they reached your feet, lies silenced before they formed into thoughts. Traps dismantled while you were still busy blaming yourself for feeling off. He doesn't need you to see it to finish it. He only calls you to remain, not because he's measuring your performance, but because that posture of staying is where the miracles unfold. You've mistaken fatigue for failure and silence for abandonment. But survival during spiritual attack is sacred ground. You may feel slow, scattered, unsure, but none of those things are signs that you're losing. They're reminders that the war is real, and that grace is still holding your place in the middle of it. You haven't missed your moment. You haven't disqualified your calling. You haven't delayed his promise. You've simply been surrounded by more than you could name. And yet, here you are, still reading, still reaching, still hoping for something more than what your senses can define. That longing is not a flaw. It's evidence of a deeper reality. Heaven has never stopped moving on your behalf. Healing often arrives quietly, not as a breakthrough, but as breath returning to places that forgot how to expand. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or sudden clarity. It begins in the background, beneath the overthinking, under the ache you learned to ignore, around the silence that's lingered longer than you expected. Somewhere in that unseen space, something starts to soften. The miracle isn't always in the moment things change. Sometimes it's in the fact you didn't walk away. The fact you still reach for God, even when he feels quiet. The fact your soul, though stretched thin, hasn't stopped hoping for something more than survival. Remaining may not look like victory, but it is. There's courage in staying present while nothing resolves. There's beauty in allowing grace to hold what your hands no longer can. There's strength in opening yourself to rest before resolution arrives. You weren't asked to hold your life together perfectly. You were invited to be honest, to stop rehearsing a version of yourself that feels invincible, to admit, even silently, that being whole doesn't mean never being wounded. Restoration isn't a performance. Peace doesn't wait until you feel worthy. Mercy doesn't arrive only when the pain is over. Every part of your process belongs. Even the parts that shake. Even the pages still unfinished. You've been taught to delay rest until things improve. But what if peace begins the moment you stop trying to earn it? There's a reason your soul keeps reaching for something quieter, slower, safer. Not because you're lazy, not because you've given up, because you're human, and that humanity is the very place where God chose to dwell. You don't need answers to be embraced. You don't need to resolve everything before you're allowed to exhale. You don't need more strength to be seen as sacred. This moment, right here in your imperfection and uncertainty, can be the starting point. That's what Calm Your Heart was made to hold. Not polished moments, but the in-between. The trembling faith, the tired confessions, the fragile yes that says, I don't know how, but I want to try. Not created for perfection, but for permission. Not a fix, but a place to fall softly. Not a formula, but a quiet companion through the long middle. If something in you feels seen right now, like the words wrapped around an ache you hadn't named, this journey may be yours too. You're welcome to come as you are. Not after healing. No, there's a space waiting, one not built on pressure or performance, but on presence. Click the link in the pinned comment and allow yourself to begin. Not with effort, with rest, with grace, with a first small breath in a quiet direction. And maybe the better question isn't, when will I be okay? Maybe it's this, what would shift if I already believed I wasn't alone in the becoming? If this stirred something that still aches inside you, I'd be honored to walk the next steps beside you. You're not here by accident. Subscribe to the channel and let's keep going together.